Ok, possiamo iniziare. Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti in questa seconda giornata di conferenza in Input 2023. Io sono Federico Falasca e con me c'è il professor Francesco Zullo dall'Università dell'Aquila. Cominciamo con la nostra sessione S20 dal titolo Densification and Urban Regeneration for Climate Adaptation in Sustainable Settlements. I contributi di questa sessione saranno 4 e invito già il primo autore a presentare, Romagni Ludovico, con il titolo, che presenterà un contributo dal titolo Recuperate the Existing Technical Devices, a Recreation Poetic. Prego.
Ok, buongiorno a tutti. Dunque, sono qui come una metastasi che, come dire, con un contributo molto laterale rispetto agli obiettivi del convegno, sollecitato dei miei assistenti che hanno partecipato, che ho visto hanno anche suscitato interesse nei loro interventi di ieri, e che cavalcano questo sentiero sempre più labile tra il mondo dell'urbanistica, della sostenibilità e una formazione fortemente architettonica, e quindi il mio sarà un intervento che è quasi una sorta di richiamo a un'attenzione su i valori un po' fondativi della disciplina architettonica. Vediamo un attimo se riesco ad andare avanti. Ok, direi che la preoccupazione planetaria, ormai planetaria, suscitata dal cambiamento climatico e che oramai è anche metabolizzata, no? Il terrore che sta suscitando richiede necessariamente una alfabetizzazione del gusto che aggiorni un po' i codici del progetto in funzione della salvaguardia dell'ambiente vissuto e del costruito. E paradossalmente, proprio nel momento in cui il cambiamento climatico inizia ad assumere un connotato estetico in termini di distruzione, di trasformazione, mi sembra che sia proprio il tema estetico ad essere il grande assente nel dibattito della sostenibilità e anche applicato ai percorsi formativi. Ovviamente il progettista, per far fronte alla drammaticità di questi cambiamenti e di queste istanze ambientali e anche tecnologiche, diciamo, deve necessariamente ampliare il suo bagaglio di conoscenze, acquisire multidisciplinarietà. Queste conoscenze a volte lo allontanano e lo costringono a prendere dei percorsi formativi che sono sempre più distanti dal suo sapere specifico e anche dal suo obiettivo, che è l'obiettivo. Io parlo come architetto, no? Qui siamo ingegneri architetti, io diciamo che parlo più che altro agli architetti, e l'obiettivo dell'architetto è quello di progettare dispositivi che migliorano le condizioni di vita dell'uomo e quindi che sono dispositivi anche a tutela delle criticità ambientali, ma sulla base di un principio estetico e persino culturale. Io credo che non si possa, come dire, prescindere da quello che rimane comunque l'obiettivo formativo e anche, come dire, di prestazione di un architetto. Quindi educare a una nuova esperienza estetica rivolta al mondo del sostenibile è un obiettivo fondamentale della transizione ecologica. Il nostro gusto estetico, che è quello ormai legato alla città della conservazione, alla città della patina storica, alla città oramai cristallizzata con i suoi riferimenti condivisi, storicizzati della modernità, della postmodernità, oggi si contamina con dispositivi probabili di sostenibilità verso un nuovo senso estetico. La città, la sua architettura sostenibile non può essere la sorella povera della città non sostenibile. Come diceva qualcuno, perché forse infine sarà proprio l'estetica a rendere sostenibile la sostenibilità. Oggi viviamo in una sorta di incubo che possiamo definire il paradigma del costruito, in base al quale per la prima volta nella storia il nuovo è esclusivamente una derivazione di quello che già esiste. Renato Bocchi ci dice che le operazioni di trasformazione della città, soprattutto all'interno dei centri storici, di solito fino anche oggi riguardano o come dire, trasformazioni o demolizioni e ricostruzioni, oppure operazioni di conservazione, di restauro. Invece oggi noi sappiamo che qualsiasi operazione necessita di costruire nuove relazioni in base a tutte le istanze del vivere quotidiano, che siano sistemi di mobilità, che siano sistemi ambientali, che siano le istanze ambientali. E quindi il progetto necessariamente deve sempre trovare nuove connessioni e nuove relazioni con quello che esiste. Il progetto a scala urbana si carica di valori ulteriori, ne vediamo alcuni esempi, che in qualche modo lavorano sul doppio binario di un equilibrio estetico della città e la risposta ai grandi cambiamenti ai quali deve far fronte. Nei nostri sistemi urbani e sulle architetture che li compongono, la protezione dai rischi, dai tanti rischi idrogeologici, calore, la necessità di riduzione della CO2, ci impone delle trasformazioni molto forti e non è più possibile reagire a queste trasformazioni esclusivamente con una strategia conservativa. Dobbiamo ritrovare una fiducia verso quei processi trasformativi che da sempre hanno accompagnato le evoluzioni della nostra città. Da sempre la città nella storia è caratterizzata da trasformazioni. L'architettura non è mai statica. Francesco Venezia ci diceva che già quando nella fase di cantiere l'architettura già preannuncia quella che sarà la sua distruzione, ha un'immagine, come dire, simile nella costruzione che nella sua distruzione. Quali sono gli spazi allora per poter agire? Gli spazi sono quelli dell'architettura, del territorio, di un territorio sovrascritto da frammenti di storicità, di modernità, di postmodernità, di contemporaneità. Specialmente in Italia questo è importante perché come dire, l'Italia è la somma di stratificazioni e quindi noi dobbiamo in qualche modo riuscire ad annettere, intersecare, sovrapporre, ritagliare volumi, stratificazioni e quindi narrazioni che ci raccontano di un processo in continua evoluzione sulla città che oggi sembrerebbe quasi interrotto. All'interno di un'embrionale ricerca che sto conducendo con anche i ragazzi che sono venuti ieri, ci stiamo divertendo in maniera ironica e provocatoria e anche conflittuale a distruggere le architetture più celebrate della modernità, come vediamo la cooperativa Strea di Moretti, no? Uno degli edifici più storici, più importanti della modernità italiana, andandoli a contaminare con dispositivi possibili di sostenibilità. È un gioco, no? L'intento è provocatorio. Questi disegni gettano un grido di allarme verso la necessità di educare il nostro senso estetico ad un nuovo rapporto tra l'esistente e il progetto di rigenerazione. Come scriveva Venturi nella sua complessità e contraddizione dell'architettura, dove esaltava un'architettura che era il frutto di stratificazioni e non un'architettura tutta bianca o tutto nera o tutta antica o tutta contemporanea, Allo stesso modo questi collage digitali passano in rassegna tutti quegli elementi scomodi nell'architettura, gli elementi fuori scala, quelli fuori posto, quelli che non hanno nulla a che vedere con il contesto, descrivendone un po' le potenzialità. Analizzano le maglie regolari e irregolari delle piante e dei prospetti, le maglie interrotte da elementi estranei, mostrandone la validità in termini compositivi. Come diceva Venturi, è meglio un'architettura imperfetta, fatta per elementi differenti che ritrovano una relazione apparentemente casuale, piuttosto che un edificio che non ha mai subito trasformazioni. E in queste nostre elaborazioni grafiche non cerchiamo mai di mitigare le impurità e di nasconderle, ma le evidenziamo, rendendole il fulcro di una visione dell'osservatore. Le parti comunemente considerate le più nobili degli edifici selezionati diventano supporti di dispositivi di captazione, serre bioclimatiche, sistemi di raccolta delle acque, di produzione energetica, di protezione dagli agenti atmosferici. Questo è il Vittoriano di Viganò a Milano, vedete, contaminato con questa visione che cerca di costruire un nuovo gusto estetico sull'esistente contaminato dai dispositivi. Ovviamente sono immagini forzate e provocatorie, ma che vogliono, come dire, destare un'attenzione. Quindi bellezza e sostenibilità devono cercare il modo di coesistere. Quindi noi dobbiamo cercare di definire i dispositivi capaci di rispondere alle istanze della sostenibilità e trasformarli in dispositivi architettonici, quindi che abbiano persino un senso estetico. Siamo quasi al termine. Sì, ok. Che abbiano persino un senso estetico. Ovviamente oggi, come ci dice questo filosofo italiano Luigi Pareison, come dire, la forma non ha più quella genesi crociana che deriva da un'idea, da un'intuizione. Oggi la forma è più l'esito di un processo, parla quindi di formatività, cioè di una stratificazione. Attraverso la sovrapposizione di strati noi riusciamo a a ottenere una forma che non è più, come dire, un qualcosa di compiuto, di statico, è un qualcosa di dinamico. E questi sono un po' i dispositivi intorno ai quali stiamo lavorando come riferimenti per provare a dare forma al tanto di quantitativo e di teorico si sta elaborando sul tema della sostenibilità. Quindi ci troviamo quindi di fronte al problema di ricostruire un nuovo equilibrio anche estetico che risani e prevenga gli effetti drammatici dei cambiamenti climatici. Qual è lo strumento con il quale noi possiamo agire? Lo strumento è quello del progetto. Ora però il progetto si carica di due valori. Da un lato il progetto in senso tradizionale, e cioè l'obiettivo progettuale deve sempre essere quello di fornire all'uomo oggetti capaci di connetterlo con l'ambiente in cui vive per un abitare adeguato e sostenibile. Dall'altro però il progetto si fa carico anche di un iter processuale che invece sarà quello di costruire incessantemente relazioni maggiormente formative, perché sempre più legato alle condizioni in continua trasformazione della realtà. In entrambi i casi comunque la bellezza gioca un ruolo fondamentale per la trasformazione della realtà e per le conseguenze della sostenibilità. Vediamo qui alcune sperimentazioni un pochino più profonde della retorica dell'aspersione verde, che usano il verde in senso anche in chiave estetica e non soltanto aspersiva, così come tutto si rimette in discussione, quello che era il rapporto tra architettura e natura, che lo ritroviamo nei dispositivi ormai celebrati di Sverrefen, come dire, rielaborati da Arroyo, no? nella casa Levene. O anche questi dispositivi più sofisticati che usa François Roche, in cui il nucleo centrale dell'architettura viene in qualche modo avvolto da una pertinenza esterna che si fa carico di protezione, di costruire questo labirinto di avvicinamento. Allora, in questo contesto complesso e evolutivo, la bellezza come oggetto della sostenibilità non deve essere considerata il fine del progetto, ma deve invertire il paradigma e diventare il mezzo attraverso il quale noi raggiungiamo la sostenibilità. Usiamo la bellezza per raggiungere la sostenibilità. Questo significa selezionare e scegliere gli elementi che, esistenti e giudicati rilevanti, possono essere il punto di partenza verso trasformazioni però effettive, reali, capaci quindi di costruire quella tensione tra le parti che crea attrazione, curiosità e appagamento. Grazie molte.
Grazie per il contributo. Ci sono domande a riguardo? Bene, procediamo allora con il secondo contributo, che vede come presentatrice l'ingegner Cristina Montaldi, e il titolo del contributo è Limit Land Take, a Matter of Thresholds, in collaborazione con il professor Zullo e Michele Munafò.
E dobbiamo venire qua? No?
Presentazione.
Che non riescono un po'. Grazie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Cristina Montaldi, and I am a PhD student of the Engineering Department of the University of l'Aquila. I am a member of research group Lanego, which deals with computational planning and indicator engineering. Now I show you this work that dealt with land take, and specifically we try to find a methodology to define threshold to limit land take. We know that soil is a key element for achieving national and international sustainability objectives, but today we haven't legislation in this field that define accurately a methodology to limit land take. Among this work objective, there is to identify the weaknesses and strength of national and regional laws on land take, and to find starting point for new policies to control land take. This work we compare this index LCR-PGR with established indexes of scientific literature, for example related to quality of life. And this comparison has the objective to try to control the phenomenon of land take. This study is part of a wider research about the identification of on scientific basis of possible cutoff value for the containment of reduction of land take or land consumption. This cutoff value could be of support to the implementation of policies at national level and to stop this phenomenon. As you can see in this image, my research is this iceberg, and at this point we made the recognition of national, European and regional law, and the objective is to define cutoff value for limited intake. The methodologies we define to reach this objective are these two. The first is to use differential analysis of variables and evolutionary simulation cards, and the other is the comparison and clustering studies with other consolidated socio-economical quality indexes. This is the first part of the research. As you can see on the top, at the European level, the regulatory framework is huge. European Union started to make law about soil conservation in 2002 with the 6th Environmental Action Programme, and we have nowadays the soil strategy for 2030. At national level, the need to approve a law on land take to stop land take is evident, but today the national policies are limited to take note that for another consecutive year, as highlighted by ISPRA, we have an additional area of 70 square kilometers with a spread of 19 hectares per day of new consumed soil. At national level, we have nowadays about 50 bills that in the title have the name land take, but in the text of these bills, only 38 define the phenomenon, and this is quite strange. And in the bills in which this phenomenon is defined, we have 16 different definitions. So the landscape is quite dishomogeneous. At regional level, the situation is similar. Specifically, the European target of zero net land consumption is implemented only in 7 regions, and only in 11 regions there is a definition of land take. In this graph, in this image on the right, there are all the methods detected in regional law about the reduction of soil consumption. We grouped these methodologies in urban scale, settlement scale, and building scale. As you can see on the bottom, the most frequent methodologies detected is the imposition of maximum threshold. In fact, in 10 law, this is the methodology chosen. It is interesting to understand the criteria that a region used to define these methodologies. Nowadays, we haven't detected any criteria, and the interesting thing is the way in which a region define the value of this threshold. Not all the 10 regions define the value, but in 5 cases, this value is the 10% of current urban surface. So region said you can increase the land take until this limit, 10% of the current urban surface. We made an evolving scenario. If we use this value to this value, and we use this value for all the at national level, it results a new urbanized area of about 2,100 square kilometers. That means if we include the city of Rome in a circle of 20 kilometers, that we have 7 new Rome on the national territory. And this is not a good thing for the environment specifically. Another important thing to underline is that this regional law said calibrate the value 10% to the current urbanized area. Nowadays, the national urban density is about 8%, but we know that the national landscape is urban landscape is very dispersed. So this value underestimates the real entity of the urbanization in the national territory. This is the graph I saw you before, and if at regional level the value of this threshold is 10%, we try to find a scientific criteria to define this number. Between these two possibilities, we choose the second one. So we use the comparison and the clustering studies with other consolidated socio-economic quality indexes. This study is in continuity with previous work. There are two examples, and specifically, this work is an experiment conducted on some indicators related to urban land conversion and demographic dynamics. Specifically, we used this index that I showed you before, LCR-PGR, that is included in the target 11.3 of 11th SDG of Agenda 2030. The choice to use this index is linked to the fact that the spatial development forecasts of urbanized built-up area are completely separated from demographic dynamics. And this fact is known also at international level. The study I show you now is at provincial scale for the Italian territory, and the reason of the choice of this choice are two. The first is that provinces are characterized by a certain homogeneity of characters, and on the other hand, it allows better flexibility and strategic management than, for example, municipal management. The results, this is there are the data we used. Specifically, we try to link the previous index with the ranking of quality of life. We used two rankings. The first one is by Il Sole 24 Ore, and the second one is made by Italia Oggi. Italia Oggi, that are two Italian journal, newspaper. These are the results. The calculation of the previous index, LCR-PGR, for 2021 showed that only 10 provinces has a positive population change between the two chrono-sections considered. But 10 provinces are not a statistical sample, so we try to modify the index, including in its formulation an absolute value. In this way, the correlation index calculated show that the correlation is weak, but stronger than the previous formulation. And is stronger for the ranking of Il Sole 24 Ore if compared with the one of Italia Oggi. We use different indexes. Another one is this one we call demo land take variation, and also in this case the correlation, the linear correlation is weak, but we can see that a positive change in the ranking of each province was detected where the value of the index has increased. The last one is the Moran index. We use this index trying to put into the study the spatial configuration of land use. In fact, one of the main problems of the index proposed by Agenda 2030 is the lack of configurational methods. In this case, we see that the moral index between these two chronosection indicates that the increase in land consumption has occurred in a dispersed manner. In conclusion, what we can say is certain that the Agenda 2030 index LCR-PGR has a several problem, point of weaknesses, and this index requires calibration. The index is quantitative and not configuration, so it's important to take into account the geography of a urban settlement, and it is necessary to identify, for this reason, other set of indicators. And it is important to define cutoff value. But in our field of research, define cutoff value is quite difficult. In fact, the clustering procedures are quite simple when for example, the verifiable effects are commonly accepted. For example, with degree of noise, pollution, and so on. In our case, define if a number has positive or negative effect on the territory is difficult because the negative consequences are observed in medium long terms, and the subjectivity prevails over the objectivity. I end my intervention, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Cristina. Are there any questions? Okay, I have a little question, Cristina. Sorry. No, I was wondering only if is the work of setting a set of indicators already present in the operational framework nowadays?
The set of indexes. Some indexes come from the literature. Some indexes were calibrated for the study. Two indexes used before were changed in their formulation, trying to better fit for our studies, but they need to be calibrated.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I call Vanessa Tomei, which will present the contribution titled Advanced Planning Tool Mosaic, Decision Support Tool Towards the Sustainable Development Goals, in collaboration with Bernardino Romano and Francesco Zullo. Thank you, Veronica. The floor is yours.
Maybe this. I can. Okay. Okay. This. Okay. So the advanced planning tool mosaic. Yes, I present this paper with my Professor Romano and my Professor Zullo. What's the meaning of advanced planning tool mosaic? This is an homogeneous and standardized framework for the contents of the municipal regulatory plans within a specific geographical area. And with this, we can choose and study the area destinations, the hypnotic system, and the technical rules defining the urban transformations. And these are some of the principal keywords that guide us in all this paper. Why we need the advanced planning tool mosaic? Because in Italy and also in Abruzzo, that is the region we experiment this this tool, we have an over-urbanization, and this is an issue because we have a very disorganized and extremely energetic planification and not functional for the rational organization of public services. So the consequences of this disorganity is a phenomenon that we call sprinkling, and is the typical phenomenon of the molecular planning, because in Italy we have 70,000 and 1,904 municipalities, and so we have also the same number of instruments for planning. The session proposed an experiment on the Abruzzo region, and we developing an analysis on the current state of municipal planning in the region itself through a recognition of the availability of documents, the type of the tool, and updated period. We made this research with also a search in all the website, and also by email and telephone number, and we recognize all the 305 municipality in this region, and these are also other sources and other tools used for the search. So the study area is the Abruzzo. The Abruzzo represents the phenomenon of molecular in all the Italy. So we know that 41 municipalities is in the category of very small, and 229 municipalities in the category of small. So the sprinkling phenomenon is significant in this way. This is the first result of this advanced planning, of this recognized, because we study the typology of the town planning in our region, and we know that 211 municipalities had the general planning tool, like a tool for our region, that responds to the 73% of the area and in size, and 85% of population. At the second time, we know that 77 municipalities have the executive tool, with the 17% in area in size and the 10% of population, and only 19 municipalities have the oldest plan, with the manufacturing plan, that is the 10% in area and size and the 5% of population. So we know a huge dishomogeneous typology of town planning. We also studied the update periods of this municipal planning, and we know the same thing. So we have a strong dishomogeneous, because some municipalities have an update before the 1995, and only the 15% is in the hand of the last century. So we arrive at the need of this planning tool mosaic, because with this we can realize a mosaic, a big database with all the important data to planning and control our region. And the important thing is the unified legend. We use the parameters of this important law, and in this way we can have a unified legend that we can understand for all the municipalities in all the Abruzzo and also in Italy the same things. Offshore, for realize the advanced PTM, we have two important phases and also some technical difficulties, because I miss that we have the base PTM and the advanced PTM. The base PTM is the base one and is the smallest database. In advanced PTM, we can also add some parameters and index for the volume and density of the municipalities. So is a huge work and is much more complicated to realize. So we have the first phase is to acquisition of zoning cartography and NTA, when we can read and choose and study the index, and the homologation of context, because every municipalities have different legend and different context, with the interpretation of the zoning introduced by the ministerial decree in the 9444/68. So the difficult is to have a unified legend to be realized with different genesis of plan zoning cartography and different techniques for final homologation with the GIS software, and the lack of standard procedures for implementing and updating tools. So this is the result, the dataset GIS of the APTM, and with this indication, we know all the urban parameters, like the land construction, the land use, the floor area, all extracted from the technical standards of implementation. And this is a 3D GIS processing on the difference between the already existing and not yet implemented volumes, but still allowed in our plan. And this is an example, because we have in black the volumes already realized, and in purple the potentially achievable from the urban building indices expressed in the technical standard. So at the end, in conclusion, we need the advanced PTM as a solution of a technical instrumental type, because with the APTM we can obtain a framework of the transformative intention of all the municipalities. We can carry out real monitoring actions, and also we can monitor the prospect of spatial planning. And with a unified legend, we can make all these things and have a mosaic of all our region and country. Thanks for your kind attention, and I hope you enjoyed all the day. Thanks.
Thank you, Vanessa. Are there any questions? Also use this microphone. Sotto.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's very interesting. I think this kind of tool are very needed, not only in Italy, but I'm aware about other studies, similar studies around the world. Not only working on the cartographic part, but also working on the planning document, which could be a direction of extension of this study. I have two questions. First of all, I don't know the situation in Abruzzo. In Sardinia, we have a regional landscape plan adopted in 2006. So After that plan, municipalities are required to make a local plan, municipal plan, which is compliant with the regional plan. And so in the description of the age and type of plan, I wonder whether it could be applied also here. And the second question is, I'm aware about an attempt in Sardinia to build a mosaic of a land use plan, which actually failed. They did it. I got the shapefile, but it is very poor in terms of attribute, and they never release as official data set. Because when they compare plans, no matter the classification, of course, all the plans are consistent with the Legge Ponte, and we have also a regional kind of application of the Legge Ponte. But the problem is that many planners design zones differently. For example, with regard to the topographic base. Some planners design just the zone and the classification on the built part. Some other include the road. So this creates, and I think they try to give guidelines. So another possible extension of this, I would like you to comment these 2 points and suggest maybe a possible extension also to look at other experience in Italy, which, as far as I know, they are in Sardinia they are quite old, probably 15 or 20 years old. But as far as I know, they could not solve all the issues in this attempt to create a mosaic for the whole region.
Thanks for your question. I swear I'm not making mistakes, but I think in Abruzzo region we don't have a law for this. Each municipality had his law and is also hold this law. So I think the need to have a unique law for all the region is the best way to proceed. And to respond to answer to the second question, I think the unified legend is the best things, and also with the, some guides, some things to add to all the plan. I think is already a good way to read and study all the shapefile or all the plan and the NTA of the municipalities and realize the PTM and also the advanced PTM in all our country. Thanks.
Can I ask another question? Yeah. I was thinking, in your work, did you give a look at the INSPIRE directive? Because the INSPIRE directive has a spatial data teams, which is land use, which include existing and future land use. And INSPIRE, as a general framework, propose a standard, interoperable standard data model for all Europe. So it will be very interesting also to have a look at that model. And the idea is that, of course, in different countries there are different rules, different way of encoding a land use plan, but it would be interesting to understand whether from your model you could easily, because this is the idea of INSPIRE, easily, maybe in an automatic way, translate to the standard European model. And also, this is a very interesting possible extension for the future to share your work also in other countries in Europe.
Thanks for this point of view. I agree, and it's beautiful. Thanks.
Where each spatial teams in INSPIRE, there is a called data specification, and there's like a 100-page document where you have the natural image description as well as technical description. So it's very interesting to integrate this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for all the questions. So we now reached the end of this session. I thank all the participants and Professor Zurlo, and we invite you at 11 o'clock at the coffee break upstairs. And if you want, I think that there are still some sessions going on. So if you want, you can go and participate also to that sessions, to those sessions. Again, thank you and have a nice day and have a good coffee break.
Imply an increase in land take and in the fragmentation in the nearby of the boundary. So we try to pursue a systematic approach in such a way to not consider the limit coming from to have an administrative boundary, but to deal with protected areas as a continuum with the built environment, built and anthropic environment.
Okay, thank you, Paja. Other question or issue? Okay, we have another comments from Davide.
More than a question, just a comment that can be also related to the previous one. So I think that one key theme is the that already raised the colleague, is the fact that private land, if you target private land for conservation purposes, you need also to think about probably monetary compensation for them, because you are, let's say, you are providing some landowners with the property right and to the others not. So, and in this sense, and this is the other link, the payment for ecosystem services, the schemes for payment for ecosystem services can be a tool that can work also for this. But my question is, how can we integrate payment for ecosystem services in spatial planning? Because I read that there are some examples that are mainly based on public-private agreements that are outside the planning, let's say, field. So it's just a comment or open question.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Angela. Angela. Wait.
No, I also wanted maybe also to follow up on what David said. I think that there is a huge possibility now related with the implementation of the new common agricultural policy. So the payment for ecosystem services is now, I mean, one of the core part of that, but they still don't know how to implement it. Yes. So planning could be one solution there. And in this sense, I wanted to ask you, because I know that, I mean, this is probably still, I mean, it's something that you may be still developing, no? The conceptual framework that you showed. Because, I mean, in the image that you showed, no, the one with the linkages among the different bubbles.
Without narrows, yes. That's what, with several points.
Exactly.
Okay.
So probably on that one, maybe you already have some ideas, but it would be nice to understand and maybe show even graphically the relation among the different bubble somehow. So if the relation is stronger, and what could be the measure or the compensation, no, that planning could actually give to all the different things that you.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're working on this.
Of course, yes, and that's just a common floor to talk with our partnership, even if in. Even in terms of feasibility or real feasibility on the basis of data availability, model availability, and trust in this kind of model, because maybe ecosystem services are really
strong in research field, but not so much in the real practice, not everywhere. So we have some difficulties to find a practical tool to render to manage this kind of research product. Okay.
Thank you, Anna, also for stimulating the discussion among the audience. Davide, is your turn with a presentation of a science policy collaboration to support the integration of climate change adaptation and ecosystem service knowledge into spatial planning.
Went along.
The case of the regional plan of Friuli Venezia Giulia.
Dove lo trovo? Yes, of course. This is 12 minutes to read the title. Dov'è? Qui?
No, guarda solo presentazioni S06, li vedi lì nel nulla.
Okay, so I avoided to read again the title. I'm Davide Longato, postdoc researcher at the University of Venice, the University, and together with the other, let's say, colleagues of this project that we are following, let's say, as a research support to a public administration. And this is a case study that we are developing with the Friuli Venezia Giulia region. And okay, let's start. So first, that is the first time that I stopped myself. So I also taken this session for making some more reflection about what we are doing as researchers, as people working in the academia, in this kind of collaboration or project that we are, let's say, asked for to work on. So science policy collaboration, what really means? So here, let's say, I found this publication and I tried to collate the main sentences that provide an explanation of what science collaboration not means, but is aimed to provide to outside academics. So I don't go through all the phrases, but I just highlighted some key words such as scientific knowledge. We are asked to provide scientific knowledge and evidence for the decisions, but not only for taking decisions, but also to disseminate what we are doing inside the academia. And one of the sentences that I like more is the third one. So it's also a sort of knowledge exchange for the policymakers, but also for us, because usually we work inside our, let's say, academics boundary, and we don't really know how it works outside. So this is also a lesson for us. And of course, all the other kind of words that maybe most of us already use in our work, such as interactive and iterative processes, multiple stakeholders involved with multiple visions, so all the kind of work that are around the planning sphere. So. Okay, so the context is the Friuli Venezia Giulia region that asked the University of Venice to provide some kind of scientific support to integrate the new concept on a, let's say, possible revision of the regional spatial plan. I mean possible revision because it's not already formally started. So the context is Friuli Venezia Giulia region, the planning aspect of Friuli Venezia Giulia region, planning instruments, sorry, of Friuli Venezia Giulia region is a kind of a complex situation because they approve regional spatial plan in 2013, but never become effective. The reason they provide is because it lacks implementation measure and instruments. So it has a strong strategic part, but then when it comes to the operationalization of the strategies, so that it never become effective. So the spatial plan still in force is the one approved how many years? Almost 50 years ago, 40 years ago. So we can imagine also the type of concept that are still in force, but with a concept used in the 80s or in the 70s. So, okay. So they want to amend the new regional spatial plan, and with this occasion, they start this science policy collaboration to include the new concept that planning is let's say, committed also by high-level institutions such as the EU policies to include and to address, especially. Okay, so how this science policy collaboration is going, okay? This is that on the one hand, we provided the, let's say, regional servants with some training courses and capacity building activities. So also Silvia can confirm she participated in one of them. So let's say, to introduce them to this new concept, ecosystem services, and the geographic information systems, and possibilities to use all kind of special data, open data from satellite images, and so on. And what are the tools and techniques that can be used for planning adaptation? Then we did this final intensive workshop. One thing that emerged is this kind of SWOT analysis, where even here I don't read each sentence, but just I highlighted some keywords that. So if we want our regional plan to be more ecological oriented, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to do this? So in the strengths, for example, is that integrating ecosystem services and climate adaptation concepts is key to align with the EU policies. So it's perfectly fit the, let's say, the dimension of ecological transition that we are asked for work on from now, probably for the next 50 years. But then also the fact that the region already adopted a landscape plan can be also a strength for the can support also the land use, let's say, spatial plan to provide more oriented, more ecological oriented planning decision based also on the landscape plans, let's say, regulations and so. Of course, we have weaknesses, but these are, let's say, more general weaknesses that we can find everywhere, not only in these regions, such as the time mismatch between the research or the fact of assessing all this kind of concept of knowledge with the planning needs, planning process, time needs. And so on. The absence of one of the main one is the absence of normative tools, and so on. So I will skip because the others are quite general. The second part, so parallel to this, let's say, capacity building of regional servants, we developed some kind of scientific knowledge exchange and regional analysis to let them better understand also the tools or the instrument that can be used to let's say, to promote the integration of this kind of approach, ecologically oriented approaches. So of course the ecosystem services or the concept of network-based solution, or what are the let's say the instruments that are more suited to implement this kind of concept and this kind of solutions. So here I provide just some examples. One of the key themes is that we needed to provide this knowledge, but we needed to provide it in a very simple terms, because here I am not presenting the other mass, but there are also another university. I have to say also this. There are also another university, this University of Udine, involved in this project, that they are committed to produce ecosystem service modeled map. So, for example, in this case, this is just an example of the famous application of the Burkhardt matrix. But in parallel, we are also developing some biophysical modeling and assessment for some ecosystem services that the region want to focus more. So what are the assessments that we are, let's say, providing as example for them, for let them understanding how the ecosystem service works? So this is an example of a map where we connected the Lancover categories to the, let's say, to the scores provided by the Burkhardt matrix for the microclimate regulation service. So according to the different ecosystem, there are different capacities to provide this service. And together with them, we started this discussion about how we can use these maps and this assessment. So one of the possible uses is the identification of the valuable ecosystems with high potential to substantially deliver the needed ecosystem services. And this can constitute the skeleton of a regional scale green infrastructure. So this can be a first tool that can be an outcome of the use of ecosystem service map. So the identification of a regional scale green infrastructure that deserve maybe more protection measures to conserve this high potential to deliver ecosystem service. Other uses are the identification of possible trade-off synergies, both between ecosystem services of different types, but also between adaptation measures and ecosystem services. And here we can also link with the climate change adaptation aspect. Other are more, let's say, not so defined, such as assessing impact of an ecosystem service or different development scenarios, or supporting the definition of ecosystem service-based monitoring criteria, for example, in the CEAE. But these are, let's say, more to be defined for future research. And here, I go on with the examples. I don't know how many time I have, but I try to be okay. So, for example, here we combine this first map. We use this first map about the microclimate regulation. We try to simulate the effect of the microclimate regulation, so also the spatial effect in the map that you see bottom left. My bottom, sorry. This is an example city of Udine, sorry. Okay, so we have different capacity to provide ecosystem services, and we try to simulate also the spatial effects. So the beneficiary areas of the city that are, let's say, in a certain buffer from the providing areas, from the providing ecosystem service. And we combine this with the land surface temperature. So with some, let's say, multi-criteria scoring methods, we aggregated the two to produce a final, let's say, vulnerability map. This is a combination of land surface temperature and microclimate regulation effect by ecosystem, and the, let's say, the resulting map in the red areas are the ones that have more land surface temperature and that have less cooling effect from surrounding ecosystem. So the areas that are more vulnerable and are more in need to intervention to reduce this vulnerability. Another one, okay, I don't go into the details of the methodology, but it's a map that simulates, let's say, or assess the vulnerability to wildfires. So, as you know, last year, this came out ongoing because last year there was this huge wildfires in the Carso region in Flimenza Giulia. So we said, why don't investigate also this aspect? So according to some, let's say, methodology that combine different data from topography to vegetation classes and the vulnerability to, or the risk of the intensity of fire, we produce this wildfire map. Okay, I skip this because then we try also to understand what are the solutions to mitigate urban Italian effect and what are the solutions to reduce wildfire risk, and try to see also there can be some trade-off. So in this case, we have in an area where we have a high vulnerability to wildfires, the first map, but of the urban forest interface, but at the same time, this forest at high provision of high capacity to provide cooling effect. And this. So one of the measures to reduce vulnerability is to remove the woodland or to move back the woodland interface. But this this have a trade-off because we remove also the microprogrammed effect regulation. So what we can do here? We need to think, for example, compensation measure. So implementing network-based solution within the urban space can compensate the loss of microclimate regulation effect from the urban-rural woodland interface. But if for this ecosystem this could be right, for other not. For example, think about the runoff, stormwater runoff, and mass stabilization that this woodland can provide to protect this area from hydrological risk. If we remove this woodland, we cannot, let's say, compensate by planting trees in another area because the ecosystem service is provided right there, this kind of ecosystem services. So this is a kind of reasoning that we are pushing also on the people working for the new spatial plan to take into account all these aspects. This is the last. So, okay, these are all beautiful assessments that maybe can be used during the planning process. I think hardly can be integrated in, let's say, map of the plan, but maybe it can be used during the planning process to support some reasoning, some decisions. But what are then the implementation instruments that can be used? That is one of the key questions they ask us. So for sure, there will be the need for a new regional and use zoning law with specific targets and standards that can support this kind of decision or can at least compensate the impacts of transformation. And of course, we need to expand or to promote ecosystem conservation measures to preserve the valuable ecosystem services. For example, the ones that provide ecosystems, if this is used of this so-called regional scale green infrastructure network, that, as I said before, can be identified, let's say, the skeleton with the ecosystem service map. And then one of the more important, in my opinion, is that equalization compensation schemes need to be performed at supramunicipal scales. In this case, this intermediate planning scale between the region municipalities need to be identified. I really finished, but so last lesson, what do they need? So do practitioners need from us, but also what do we need as researchers working in science policy interface? So one of the key aspects is the knowledge transfer and training of people working for developing plans is at least as important as the scientific support that we can give. Then what do we need? Methods and opportunity to integrate such new concept in highly codified plans, procedures, and instruments. And this can be done only collaborating with them, because then each region has its own planning processes, planning schemes, planning hierarchy. So this is something that we need to learn from them also. And the last one that both of us need, in my opinion, is that locally adapted methods and tools to practically finance and implement the measures such as network-based solution. And this is their need without burdening planning processes and procedures. So it's a very, very complex challenge, this one. So it was just lesson learned. And I finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Davide, for your presentation. I saw that both in your presentation, also in the one of Angela, emerged the topic of ecological, environmental compensation scheme mechanism, okay? And also we in our research lab, we are working on that. So maybe start to become again a popular topic on ecosystem service planning, because I think that in the last 5 years was not so mentioned, I think, as an issue. Okay, questions, comments from the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Yeah, maybe just more of an observation. I think what's often missing in this science policy interface is the society. So we often refer to science-society policy interface because the policy makers, the decision makers are usually only interested in what the societal implications are, especially when it comes to decisions that might actually keep them in power. So to include the normal guy, the society in these processes just adds another layer that would help you convince the policymakers to implement and make decisions. Thank you.
Yes, it's true. I think the over umbrella that need to be discussed. So the cultural support on in this kind of the ecological transition. Now it's called like this, but so usually policymakers or the politics in general take this decision maybe not because they wanted to really improve the environmental, let's say, socio-environmental aspect of the region, but because they to get support, to get political support, so they tend to make popular decisions. So this is kind of cultural change also that need to accompany this kind of planning processes. So our role should be also to not only to communicate this kind of to exchange knowledge, not only to policymakers, but especially to society in broader terms, to the society. Yes, I think you caught one of the main points of this challenging transition.
Thank you. Andrea, please.
No, thank you for your presentation. I was curious about the trade-off process and your relationship with the administration. So how it's structured, because at the end, it's the policymakers that decide which kind of vulnerability then is like the priority, but I think that also our role is to suggest which kind of vulnerability is the one that maybe should be tackled. So I was curious how like you structure the process, this kind of relationship with the public administration to understand how to combine the different layer and how to assess which is the like this trade-off.
Which compromise we have to
yeah at the end of the day.
Oh no, yes, like I said before, we can have different levels of trade-offs and different opportunities to compensate the trade-off. Sometimes we can have the opportunity, sometimes not. So let's say the fact is how you narrate to practitioners this kind of trade-off and compromises that they need to take into account in their decisions. So, for example, this is something that needs to be done with policymakers and also with the involvement of other experts. In some cases, it should be better to maintain an ecosystem services and lose another one. In other cases, it's the opposite. But I think that this is something that we cannot say alone. It's something that they need to be kind of waiting process of the needs of the territory. So, for example, asking in this specific case, so I say asking the local administration of this town. I don't remember which kind of small town of Friuli region is, but with 100 inhabitants. But for example, do you want to have the
the wildfire risk reduced, or do you want to have the ecosystem services of the woodland, let's say, protected as they are? I don't have an answer of case by. This is something that needs to be assessed case by case, and probably is not the role of a regional plan to do so. But yes, this is something that need to be addressed case by case, and is this focal point of the final decisions. Also, one of the, let's say, limitation of the barrier is the scale of implementation and of the decision, because here we are working, we are trying to support knowledge for a regional plan, but we know that most of the adaptation measures are decided and are implemented at the local scale. So this is also another, I think, aspect that need to be addressed. So what's the role of, let's say, large-scale planning instruments in addressing local-scale decisions? I think I don't answer to your question.
Which is the role, for example, in Università of this kind of assessment?
No, the question is maybe like in Friuli Venezia Giulia, how do you think that this kind of ecosystem service mapping will help like local administration to choose different nature-based solution, or to cope with different? Because one thing that I was wondering, for example, last year there was this like great wildfire. If you ask to maybe not the technician, for them in the month after the wildfire is the priority,
of course.
But they cannot see like so I don't know, I was wondering how then like this high strategic level plan can help local administration that maybe do not have the resources to say, to also understand like this complex problem. How, I don't know, I think it's an open question.
No, yes, that's great. I think one of the key aspects is that can, let's say, not support, but can guide a narrative or a decision on the possible compensation measure that you need to adopt if you lose that ecosystem service on the impact, respective of the impact. I think one of the key of the.
I don't know, maybe if this kind of assessment could be the first layer of knowledge, because I mean, if I will be a policymaker and I saw these maps, one of the first questions will be, okay, but what is the amount of population that could be affected by this kind of risk of wildfire? And what are the fragile population that could be affected by urban heat island? And after, I don't know if maybe there could be also a combination of solutions that could support the provision of macroclimate regulation, but also are less attacked by wildfire. I know that there are some species that are less attacked by wildfire, so maybe a combination of a solution yes, can, let's say. So I suppose it is a first stage of assessment. After you need a deeper investigation to know, okay, these vulnerability are located in this area, but I want to know also the population, or there are other kind of ecosystem services that are provided by this area. I don't know, maybe cultural ecosystem services or provisioning ecosystem services. And after, when I have all this big data, big knowledge, I can maybe make a selection or a decision, but not at regional level. I suppose, consider also maybe your law, but it's something very, very local, and also with the implementation measure that you mentioned that at the regional level you don't have now. So
Yes, that's right.
Yes, Angela, please.
Yes, I agree with comments with Silvia. Actually, I understand that you deal with multiple ecosystem services, but in this case, I don't see a trade-off. I see a demand to invest in reducing vulnerabilities to wildfire because that urban forest offer supply microclimate regulation, but for sure other services and benefits to local population. So just a comment in this specific
Okay,
example.
It was just an example to show that different, let's say, also adaptation decisions. So instead of, let's say, removing the woodland for 200 meters, you can, I don't know, maybe remove the actual woodland, but then replant more adapted species. The thing that was also Silvia saying.
Okay, we can move to the last presentation because we are a little bit late. Federica, please. And Federica, and the title of your presentation is Ecologically Oriented Urban Planning and Practices, Case Studies from Sardinia, Italy. No, voi l'avete, ciao Federica, voi l'avete su chiavetta? Sì, sì. Ah, perfetto.
Sì, sì, l'ho fatta già stare meglio qui.
No, ci vedo un poco dopo. Perché c'è il riflesso dello schermo. No, siete di voi. No, non c'è quello.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And within the context of the input conference, today with my colleague Federica Leone, we will present some of the lines of research developed by our research group of DICEAA of the University of Cagliari in the context of spatial planning. Our chief scientist is Professor Corrado Zoppi, who we have been collaborating for several years. We want to present two recent research experience that focuses on two themes: the integration of sustainable development strategies into local planning, and green infrastructure, ecosystem services, and ecological corridors. Okay. For the first theme, the 2030 agenda marked a radical mindset change in terms of global development and overcoming the traditional sectoral vision in favor of an innovative approach that links the concept of sustainability with an economic process, social justice, and environmental protection. Therefore, a global sustainability oriented effort in required from all national, regional, and local government, including the definition of national and regional strategies for sustainable development and their implementation at the local level. This is the real problem. In 2017, Italy approved the National Strategy for Sustainable Development. the implementation phase of the national strategy for sustainable development is delegated to the regional administration with the task at defining the regional sustainable development policies in compliance with the guidelines defined at the national level. In 2018, the Ministry for Environmental Protection of Land, DICEAA, now the Ministry of Environmental and Energy Security, issued a call for proposal aimed at supporting the implementation of national strategy at the regional scale, sorry. That call proposal was addressed to university, foundation, and in general research institutes. The University of Cagliari submitted a proposal titled SOS Lab, aimed at defining governance tools to support the Sardinian regional administration in the elaboration of its regional sustainable development strategy. Within the research group coordinated by Professor Zoppi, we were involved in the first laboratory whose objective was the definition of a methodological approach for the integration of regional strategy for sustainable development at municipal and metropolitan planning level through a model in which the elaboration of the plan and its evaluation represent a unique process. Therefore, the strategic environmental assessment is assumed as the conceptual reference for the proposed model because the ACA procedure followed the elaboration of the plan along all the process from the preparatory to the implementation phase. The methodological approach was implemented in two planning experiences that concerned the elaboration of two plans at the local level, the preliminary municipal master plan of the city of Cagliari and the plan of the Pilora Regional Natural Park. In particular, we present the second experience concerning the definition of the Pilora Park plan. The methodological approach used on the concept of the logical framework that allows for the integration of the assessment and planning processes, in particular the hierarchical approach of the logical framework used with reference to the ACA, to the Strategic Environmental Assessment procedure of the Pilora Park Plan. It consists in four levels as follows, but it is very important to the three step which environmental sustainability, sustainable objectives, specific objectives of the park plan, action of the park plan that may be favorable or potentially unfavorable with respect to the environmental sustainability objective. The objective and action defined in the regional strategy sustainable development are integrated. It's possible to see in the scheme within the only process in which evaluation is fully integrated into the park plan definition process according to the principle of procedurality. Okay. And in this scheme, we wanted to represent the process of definition of environmental sustainability objectives in the first phase, in the second phase, the specific objectives, and the first step, the plan action. The strategies is integration into only phases the process. It is possible to define a logical framework to the regional strategies is very integrated into only steps of the processes.
Okay. The second aspect that we want to present is related to the theme of multifunctionality and connectivity in spatial planning in relation to green infrastructure, ecosystem services, and ecological corridor. So I'm going to present a research conducted with my colleague Corrado Zoppi and Federica Isola, where we identify the ecological corridor within the Sardinian region, and we intend to analyze what are the connection between the landscape component of relevance, of environmental relevance, identified by the regional landscape plan of Sardinia region through multiple linear regression in order to assess if to what extent the present regional spatial zoning may represent and can be used as a basis to implement regulation and aim at protecting ecological corridor. Different definition of landscape connectivity exist. We refer to the definition of functional connectivity that is related and to spaces, so is species oriented, and in many studies is analyzed through the resistance-based models. Our cases is related to the Sardinia region, and we analyze we consider all the terrestrial area included within the two typology of protected area. We have a natural protected area that are all these areas are the areal protected according to the national law. So we have a national park, regional park. Then we have the public woods, the permanent houses of faunal protection, the Ramsar sites. Then we have another typology of protected area that are nature 2000 sites, and we consider only the terrestrial part of this protected area because analyze the ecological corridor and considering also only we don't consider the marine areas. So the methodological approach is structured into two phases. We have a first phase when we identify the ecological corridor, and the second phase where we compare, analyze what are the connection between the components defined by the regional landscape plan in terms of ecological corridor. So what are the patches that can be included within the ecological corridors? In relation to the first phase, we base our methodological approach in relation to a methodology developed by Canas et al. And the spatial taxonomy of the ecological corridor is identified through a least cost path model and is structured into four phases. In the first phases, we identify and elaborate habitat suitability maps, the input data related to the Sardinia land cover map, and in relation to a study that assign a value is a species-specific studies, where to each land cover is assigned a value in relation to the possibility to host spaces, and it is elaborated by the regional administration. The second step concerns the definition of the ecological integration map that is based on the value attribute by the Barcard matrix that we see in the previous presentation. Then in the third phase, I'm defining the resistance map by means of the habitat suitability and ecological integrity maps, building on a study elaborated by Lariu and Nielsen. And finally, in the fourth stage, we identify the ecological corridor through the use of the linkage map pathways tools of the GIS linkage mapper toolbox. And the result of a linear identification of the ecological corridors and the value of the cost-weight distance, where the cost-weighted distance analysis is the accumulative cost of each cell to its neither source. Then we analyze through a regression model which patch can be included within which patch belong to the landscape component featured by environmental relevance defined within the regional landscape plan may be included within the ecological corridor. The problem was the ecological corridor have a linear dimension, so we don't have we have only the we don't have the two-dimensional of the ecological corridor, so we assume to cluster the cost-weight distance value map in 10 decile, and we take the second upper limit as the threshold for the inclusion of a patch in an ecological corridor. We have finished our presentation because we thought to present only the methodological approach and not the result of research, in line with the aim of the session that was to share our research that we made in our research group. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for your presentation. Any comments, questions from the audience? Okay, yeah, please.
Thanks for your presentation. My question is on the first part. So I was wondering, because you mentioned many times the environmental objectives coming from, let's say, the national strategy, I was wondering if you also somehow consider the impact on the environment of other objectives, like the social more or economic, those not strictly related to the environment, but if they were somehow included in the process.
The methodology was applied to. The methodology was applied to the elaboration in relation to two case studies. The first was the preliminary municipal master plan of the city of Cagliari, and the second was the plan of the natural park, the regional natural park of Tepilora. So we have to focus on objectives that can be achieved in relation to this specific tool, and some social and economic objectives are not, they cannot find a part in a special plan. This is a problem, but we have to focus our attention only on those objectives that can be really achieved or faced within a special plan. A local plan is a municipal master plan.
But for the master plan of the city,
the master plan is the objective in the master plan should be should be translating into territorial action. You can, in Italy or in Sardinia, the municipal master plan provide territorial action are not related to, maybe the general objective may also focus on social and environmental, but in relation to the hierarchical, to the logical framework, the general objective has to be translated to the specific objective and then in action. But it's difficult to translate. In general terms, you can achieve a social objective, but with territorial action, I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe no. Because the municipal master plan give a zoning scheme, so I don't know in our region, but in Sardinia, I think in Italy, we don't have a plan with a strategy and vision that go over traditional zoning. So
we go much further than zoning now. So it's something that, but still, even when there was zoning, to me this does not mean that there were not social objectives related then to some territorial impact and strategy. But then, maybe it depends on how we interpret the naming them. But it's just a reflection to open up. Maybe with this a different point of view, you can look at the objectives in another.
But in the definition of maybe standards of master plan, municipal master plan, it's very important to the social entity.
Exactly.
It's very important.
So standards are much more into social actually than into environmental. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Based on the fact that I arrived not at the first paper, but in the second part, I think that what we discussed today can be mainly connected with the general stream concerning ecosystem services that looks at the ecological application of ecosystem services. We know that probably the final paper goes more in the direction of the spatial stream of assessing ecosystem services as a contribution to become a support for spatial planning in a specific way, in a proper way, in a mapping effort to achieve, to contribute, to monitor transition related to a specific decision in deriving from planning. Today we escape the stream concerning economic appraisal of ecosystem services. I really think that according to the vision that we should share about the fact that the priority of our priority in our discipline is to apply in the spatial dimension of this general framework. Now we can define ecosystem services as a framework. We should clarify a direction for our research. Because also in the case of the colleagues that shows the municipal approach, that renaturalizing a nature-based solution and so on, I perceive more an objective of ecological restoration more than a comprehensive a contribution that ecosystem services provide for the comprehensive assessment of land use and land management practices connected with planning. From my perspective, this is something that we should bring in the top of our agenda, because our contributions could be connected with current practices. I see a few months ago, I engaged a discussion with the county of Norfolk in England, where they are entitled of the management of a protected area, one of the most beautiful in England, so connected with the additional values of managing natural values, no, in their territory. And they really applied ecosystem services as a comprehensive framework through which they derived those maps that helps decision makers to understand the transition that currently are developed, the impacts that some decision like infrastructural design or something like that brings in the natural framework at regional scales, including achieving at the end one final map that is really connected with the concept of multifunctionality that you mentioned in the beginning, and that I thought to translate in the concept of territorial specialization in ecosystem services supply, that becomes something useful, not for us, but for the end user of our research. It means decision makers, it means those who are responsible to set up, to approve, and to manage spatial planning. This is something that could become an argument. No, this is something that could become an argument in our research, and I will be very happy to discuss those beautiful women that are on the table. Not now because we have lunch. Okay.
Thank you, Francesco. I think that your reflection is in line also with our idea to organize this session, that is the integration of ecosystem services, or the use of ecosystem services is not related to a specific instrument like plan, but is in the planning process, because this is allowed to consider ecosystem services in different steps, and for the definition of strategies, for supporting the knowledge system, for spreading the knowledge to stakeholders, but also communities, to use the concept of ecosystem service for the implementation of strategies or management strategies for support the implementation of planning policies. So it's a concept that is not just related to a single use, but need to be stressed in different steps. And for us in the planning, okay, I mean planning process, but also considering the strategic environmental assessment, that is probably the process more suitable for host the concept of ecosystem service and to support the use of this approach. I don't know, maybe Chiara and Claudia, if you want to add something.
I just had a brief thing that I think it also connect with what we were saying before, that we do have huge regional differences in Italy now in terms of how we plan and where we are actually, because ecosystem services are nowadays a kind of an integral part of the new municipal plan in Emilia-Romagna. So we're working with the region, and we're doing capacity building, as Davide was mentioning before, with municipal civil servants that are now pretty aware of what ecosystem services are. To me, it's not that the point now, but it's much more into what we were mentioning before. So which are then the compensation measure, the actual implementation, let's say practice, that we can together with them, because they have much better knowledge that we have about the actual scheme of implementation of how these, let's say, mapping and spatially referred then plan can actually be translated into reality. But I think, and I hope that with the network that we would like to build, there's also much space for exchange knowledge about different way we plan, because with Davide, for example, we have spoken about this quite much, and between Friuli and Emilia-Romagna there's already a huge difference is in Veneto, and Veneto is much closer to what we have in Emilia-Romagna, for example. So we kind of, I think, understand each other very well, but then it happens that when I speak with, I have some colleagues in Puglia, for example. I'm from Marche, and Marche and Emilia-Romagna are, they are bordering and still. it's markets really like, I think the urban law is like of the 70s, it's like Friuli-Venezia Giulia more or less. So it's very regional, it's something that we have to take into account. Then we want to go international, and there it's easy to speak about methods, but then if we want to speak about implementation and law, we have to take into account that we are very diverse, and that can be a richness and not a, let's say, a barrier, no, to go on. Sorry, this is very Italian, but still, I mean, I don't know how it is there, but here, I mean, planning is a regional competence. So at a certain point, when we go into implementation, there are huge differences.
Okay.
That's it. I think we thank all the beautiful men and women that were present at this session. Thank you again for presenting and for sharing your thoughts.
No, okay, another 2 minutes because I saw the other, they're walking. In the meanwhile, I would like to highlight that tomorrow morning, as you can see also on the website, the program has been updated, and because I stressed a lot all the organizer in past weeks, also in July, in order to find the time for a sort of input. General Assembly is a very big word in this case, but just for discussing with a group of friends, or who is mainly the community of input. And tomorrow morning, after the keynote, the plenary, with the keynote with Jacques Teller, we will have just 1 hour before the lunch, the time for just for discuss for a certain way. But it's important to have also the young researchers, because we need new idea, new perspectives. It could be important for the conferences. Just for I know that unfortunately Domenico will start tomorrow morning early, but Domenico could give us a good contribution. But I expect a lot of idea and discussion tomorrow morning. Che faccio? Okay, with the silent who enter will feel a little bit guilty is important. Important decision where to sit for the group of Cagliari. Secondo te partiamo? Ok. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored and happy to introduce the second keynote of the conference, but just a second just for the temporal schedule, not for importance. Claudia van der Lach.
Yes.
Okay, I hesitated for the pronounce because because she changed the surname last time. I'm very honored and happy because she's a friend, merely a friend, but also an important researcher. She's professor of urban analytics at Oslo Metropolitan University. She has 2 PhD, no one. She studied a lot. She carried out the first PhD at the Technical University of Vienna in architecture, and the second in geography and regional planning in complexity-based modeling at the University of Besançon with Pierre Frankhauser, and she worked a lot on fractal analysis. She is one of the most important experts in the world in space syntax and in fractal analysis. Despite she's very young, she has a lot of publication with a huge impact. She was also awarded with prestigious Michael Behenny Prize in 2015. At the beginning, she was assistant professor at the Technical University of Vienna, later associate professor at the University of Groningen in Netherlands, and now is a professor at Oslo Metropolitan University. Obviously, I don't want, it's not my idea, it's not better to waste other time, it's better to leave the floor. The floor is yours if you want to start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm deeply honored to speak to you today. And some of you who went to Athens may know some of the content. I hope I still can contribute some interesting facts and details. And for others, I hope it's a very inspiring new way of thinking. So as you see, what I'm going to talk about today is urban planning with a multifractal, multi-scale logic is a research project, kind of something that has been going on for 15 years. So the group you see here in the background, it's always a team effort with Pierre, Olivier Bonheur, Gilles Boudel, etc. Has been ongoing for 15 years, and I'm today presenting you some basics of it, so how it emerged as well as where we stand today. Sorry, need my glasses. So most of you know these are the most two well-known publications, how the whole fractal city debate and arena started like in the 90s. And quite interesting is Mike Betty and Paul Longley and also Pierre Frankhauser published at the same time a book on how fractal cities works. They had a bit of different approaches. Pierre was very conceptual. Mike had all these dynamic modeling simulations approaches in there. But this was kind of the emergence of this theme in urban planning becoming extremely prominent around in the 90s. And why are those publications so important? Simply because they were able to show for the first time for our community that cities have fractal properties. So that was the first time we had this kind of academic, scientific proof involved in the debate based on famous publications like everybody knows Mandelbrot, Weitenengel, and so on. Or Allinghaus, who actually did analysis on crystallar, if it's fractal or not. It's Allinghaus and Allinghaus. And what is more important, building upon these, was actually that a large number of publications later on contributed to validate the hypothesis of cities as fractals. This is always important. So this is typical the Karl Popper, where's the black swan? We need to prove what's working, what is not working, and what is right or not. And quite interesting also with these early applications then, and I show here some kind of across scales. We had only a few applications, in academic writings on fractal conceptual models. And quite interesting when you look into architecture, urban planning, or geography, all those fields had a bit on their own approach to fractal analysis and how to apply fractal conceptual models. Most famous here is from Beauville, the book from 1996, is Fractal Geometry in Architecture and Design. On city scale, I already mentioned Pierre's work, of course, course, Nikos Salingaros, also a longtime collaborator of mine, did fantastic work where he merged mathematics in the sense of Christopher Alexander between math and urban planning and so on. And on the regional scale, this is where Pierre and I contributed fundamental new thoughts and insights from 2015 ongoing with our publications, how to apply this. And why are fractal, or what are fractal systems? We know this. I think everybody heard that the tree is fractal. One of my most famous or most favorite examples are actually our brain cells, as well as our brain network. So on the left-hand side, you see a single brain cell, which is a monofractal. And on the right-hand side, you see our brain network, which is mathematically speaking a multifractal. If you compare it with cities, we have the same logic. On the left-hand side, it's Besançon, a town in France. And our dear colleague Igor, where are you? Is here from Besançon tonight. Hello, thank you. It's a monofractal, and it's a classically, historically evolved grown town, which we find a lot also in Italy, of course. And on the right-hand side, you see France, Belgium, the Netherlands on the regional scale, which is a multifractal logic, mathematically speaking. And these are the classic NASA image at night you see, so it really represents the network. So we see actually that this logic of living system really can be applied to anything. I really like to choose this, and this is also what really inspired me, and Pierre has been working this on for a long time on working with this in urban planning. More morphological analogies, because before we saw the network analogy, you always have to separate between fractal analysis when you analyze a network, a bifurcation tree, for example, or a morphology in an urban area or in a city. So on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, what do you think is the city? So who says on the left? Please raise your hand. Who says on the right? It's the city? Oh, you're also smart. Yes, it is. On the left-hand side, you see a fractal simulation. On the right-hand side, you see actually Hamburg. But you can see the similarities, right? Of this morphology. But in terms of applications, yes. And then you have to ask yourself, I mean, it's nice to work on fancy things, and I'm always already excited to work on fancy, also sometimes complicated or complex things. But then I have to ask myself, so what is the added value for us as urban planners, as we want to contribute to practice and policy making, to use actually a fractal geometry or fractal geometric models or models with a fractal logic, depends on how you apply it, on a regional or metropolitan scale. And I always like to refer to Peter Calthorpe and Fulton here, the regional city, because what it allows us is efficiency, to simulate efficiency and optimization strategies. So for example, you can manage urban sprawl with a centralized decentralization. You have heard this term, it's a classical Calthorpe term. So I always like to take concepts which have already been established in our field and apply it to the fractal analysis. Another image very famous and popular is, of course, Christoller. I took the German originally from his 1933 book. And the idea is also that this multi-scale logic allows us to create centers and subcenters. So it's the classic idea of hierarchy, but a hierarchy with a diversity in a Christoller sense, and I will show this later. And what does it do for us if we use it for a planning model? And here there's a very simple scheme, and I borrowed it from Pierre. He kindly gave it to me, is normally we are used to work on the scale. And the hardest thing is when you model or have worked with data is actually to link them across scale through the spatial analysis. I'm not saying that you just take the data on and aggregate and disaggregate and then you analyze them. Taking the analytical results into the next scale as an automated process. That's really hard, takes a lot of computation power, but iteration of fractals allows us to help exploring how pattern organization change it from one scale or shifts from one scale to the other. So that's why it's actually quite an interesting approach, which gives us this little trick to link scales in planning models. And here, fractality and movement to understand as well why it's important. Here I added a fractal dimension. And actually, this is Strasbourg and in 1986 and in 1969. And what it also does, and I think this is a common phenomenon we see, and it also refers to talks we heard about pedestrian movement, the 15-minute city, public transport is car movement and urban sprawl. What it does actually, motorization makes the urban pattern uniform. So less hierarchy through motorization, more hierarchy in the self-organizing process, and optimization is immer partially both, top-down, bottom-up, in cities if we have active transport means or public transport, walking, cycling, bus, train, etc. And we can already see this here in the fractal dimension of the surface. So that's the fractal dimension from the surface. So it was in 1986 is what 1.80, where we see the urban sprawl, motorization kicking in, more car use in Strasbourg with, of course, metropolitan/regional growth. We already say it becomes 185. We all know 2 is a surface in fractal terminology speaking. So we already see this kind of homogeneous distribution when we use more cars based on urban sprawl or towards urban sprawl. Important to know when we work with fractal models and we use them for modeling, simulations, setting up planning models, we have to be aware that we have actually 3 types of fractals. Because everybody says, oh, fractals are theoretical, I cannot use them for models. True. We had discussion with statistical modelers. He said, no, it's not precise. True. I mean, the world is not a mathematical fractal. So let us look at these 3. The first means, when you look at the 3 types, is, of course, statistical self-similarity. So here it's a very simple image about the fractal correlation dimension. Here it's Besançon. It's from Cécile Tanier, and it really shows us that we can statistically measure fractals. And very often it's kind of very often you have to cut the system morphologically, also in different patterns, in order to reach the kind of affiniation to a fractal dimension. The second one, it's very mathematical. It's a theoretical self-similarity. And what we see here is a monofractal, a Sierpinski carbon with iteration step 0. You see this here, 1 and 2. So how it actually dissolves. The third one is a pseudo self-similarity. And actually this is what we are looking for when we model. This is what we do. And as you already can see, and I've showed this with the analogies, when we disaggregate or have the iteration steps, we move to smaller scales. You already can imagine an agglomeration here, a spatial pattern. And this is actually the concept and the idea we use when we model with a fractal logic. And why, again, I think this also links very nice to what I've heard here so far and the interest of this research group here, and I know it's very diverse, is also why to use it. Fractals, and this is a profile I was drawing many years ago, enable, and I will give you proof later on, to marry the build-up space with the open space, the green space, on different scales through iteration. So it always allows a space for biodiversity and green spaces implemented into built-up cities. So this is now, one could say, this is the counter-argument to the compact city. And it's kind of is, but the idea is to have a balance between a compact city and a fractal city. And there has been proof from colleagues and scholars in Oxford, if we have an over-compactness in cities, we deal with congestions, and everybody everybody knows this. I guess Rome is full of congestions, right? Tokyo have solved it very nicely with public transport, for example. So there are, of course, means of balancing out. But on the regional scale, if you prepare strategic plans, this is one of the big advantages. So we came up with strategies and planning principles. So what did we want when we modeled and when we operationalized Pierre's ideas, and I did the first better version and algorithm writing, is what did we want to come up with actually? What was our aim and goal? It's an hierarchically, polycentric, and we heard this as well today, urban development to manage urban sprawl. Sustainable, transit-oriented development, locally well-balanced urban patterns and functions, the marriage, so the interlinkage of green areas and built-up areas, preservation of large interconnected networks of green areas to conserve biodiversity, and the urban microclimate. So that's pretty a lot. And when you think, because of course you will use the fractal geometry as a morphological model, as a carrier for your functional model, and of course you will have an accessibility means in there, you really have also to be aware about the boundary of a fractal. This is most important. So the fringe of fractal models, and I show here on the left-hand side a Territorial, on the right-hand side a classic Sierpinski, is about how much space do I consume. And according to what kind of fractal geometric logic you use, you can define how the fringe of your urban development, where you use this as a morphological model, how much space and land use it will consume. And this is actually quite interesting. So to make a long story short, on the right-hand side, the Sierpinski turned out to be the better model as it was closer, the accessibility and the proximity to open spaces were closer, meant we had less travel times across scales from local to regional to green spaces or any leisure activities. So that's why we started modeling with the Sierpinski after running some tests. And to give you a brief history before I go into medias res about the model is, I mentioned it already, it started with Pierre's considerations in 2008. Then I came into play and we operationalized these considerations and the concepts and developed the first software jointly with informatician Gilles Woodil. Then another 6 years or 5 years in a row was the calibration of the model and the fine-tuning of the algorithm. And now we're currently working on the QGIS plugin. It's nearly finished. We still have to repair a few bugs in there, but hopefully we can launch the final version in QGIS, the application, this coming summer. So I think we only need another 2-3 months of repairing some minor issues there. And then after finally nearly 16 years, we have a really planning model in QGIS ready. So here's I talked about the conception. So on the left-hand side, again, you see Kristalla's transport network. In the middle, you see Pierre's conception, the multifractal interpretation of Kristalla. And on the right-hand side, I always like to use this more on a local scale. You see Calthorpe's local TOD model, the transit-oriented model. And I think you can already see the similarities in there, also the discrepancies and the differences in order how this model works and how they are hierarchically connected with hubs who are distributed. And then we set up some rules, and we had some challenges in there. So first we developed the rules. We developed a morphological rule, an accessibility rule, a land use rule, a green area rule, and a density rule. And we identified the challenges for each rule, but we also identified how to resolve it or how to deal with it and what we implemented. And most important is, of course, the morphological model, which has a fractal iteration rules, and also the green areas, because they also underlie a fractal logic and density. This was then also the population model, which we used the ponderation rule. You will see it. You can move between urban and rural population, and then it also became we further developed it then. So accessibility is going to be interesting. I will show you. So the basic model, this was the basic model we developed, population accessibility, and how it responds to multifactors within terms of self-similarity, self-affinity, and the needs of empirical data. You all are familiar with accessibility models and how to analyze this. We heard fantastic research today. I don't have to go into medias res here. And this was the first concept then. So this was this first scheme I prepared, parallel to the algorithm, to understand how we do function. And what is interesting about this scheme, aside that it's quite colorful, is the functions were classified according to a temporal scale and, of course, a spatial distance scale. And temporal is, we also discussed this a little bit today, is quite important. For example, in France, it's important that the small bakeries are around the corner. It's a daily service. A big supermarket can be within a weekly service. Or opera, if you want to go to the opera, you're willing to travel longer distances, right? To go maybe once a month, every second month, half a year, occasionally to theater, opera, etc. And based on empirical data, we had like a whole data set base running, which we always refined. But this is actually what this scheme is telling us. The temporal scale of services and facilities linked to the iteration rule means linked to the hierarchy coding of centers in the sense of Crystalla. So it's nothing else than a further developed Crystalla in a multifractal sense. The same accounts, everything in green, for leisure and green areas. So we even collected empirical data for whole regions, how the distribution in terms of size of green areas is and how people would use them in order to understand what the needs are of the people. Then we thought, okay, it's nice if we have this theoretical fractal data, et cetera, but actually it should be a planning model, it should be a decision support model. That was the big idea. So we need to be able to move the cells. So we came up with the idea that within the previous iteration, according to your expertise as a planner, you can manually, in the software, move the cells around in order to develop certain areas where you think you want to actually take the process, the analysis, and understand what kind of potential the cell or grid has. We call it cells because it's not really a grid in that sense. And of course, you had certain restrictions which we built in to keep up the pseudo-similarity for fractals. Then you could play around with different forms where you want to have green belts, etc. It also responds to if you want to use the idea of a Fourier dust, then you have a green belt around your main center. If you use a Sierpinski, then you don't have it, and you have more wedges. Also, it depended a bit what kind of geometric form you were using or wanted to use. And this wasn't, I wanted to show you, so the idea was that also in those cells you have a TOD, a transport hub, you have access to with different road hierarchies. But how did we actually then make it work? So the most important was that we came up with a coding system for the centers and subcenters. So the coding system went through all iteration steps. This is an example I constructed for the Vienna-Bratislava region. On the left-hand side, you see Greater Vienna and Bratislava, and it's about 200 kilometers, just to give you an idea how the axes are split on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, it was an urban scale. It's maybe 4 kilometers in diameter. And actually we created this coding system in order across the iteration steps to link the cells, which dissolved, and to also transfer the analytical results and the data. So the aggregation and deaggregation, this was defined by the coding system and the hierarchy of the certain center. So it had like a morphological and a functional duty, to say so. And this was then built into the iteration function system. That's how a fractal works. So this is how we actually resolved it to build in an IFS in the first Java software. And then on top of this morphological model, because it was our carrier, we had the accessibility model with catchment areas. Later it became a satisfaction model, so the spatial and temporal hierarchies of accessibilities. And where did we get this through? Classic imperial data. Back then we used, of course, French national survey, so what people like. Where they like to go, how often they like to go somewhere. And in France, it came out back then, and of course it's very context dependent, that most people like to live in single individual houses with a little green garden around. And depending on where you are in the world, this will shift. Your daily, weekly, monthly, or occasional accessibilities to shops, and this defined our ranking, which we then implemented. Actually very simple, it's additive, as you can see. So the accessibility to function from a certain center for daily needs, this was our number 4, so 4 was daily, 1 was occasional, was then weighted in the model and added to the morphological model. So that's how we connected the functions with the more spatial model. And the weightings, that's what I really liked. It was not some automated process because we didn't like it. We thought if a planner, if the mayor, if a decision maker comes to us, we want him to be able to tell us this bakery is important and the opera not, or the other way around. The opera is super important for us, but the bakery not. So we could weight the accessibility and the function, which were linked to the functions, according to importance for these individual towns, cities, metropolitan areas, and regions. We wanted to apply this. And with every iteration step, it was a simple window. You could just change all the weights and recalc the whole thing. And then we started combining them together. So first, for each daily, weekly functions, we had this, we calculated it, and then we started combining it in a crystal sense to get actually a synthetic value. To get, as I didn't show it here, to get a synthetic value about the overall or global evaluation. Actually, it was a synthetic evaluation. So to understand within one cell how all hierarchies across scale for each scale level equals iteration step will constitute the function or the importance or the development potential or of this cell. The next thing was the population model. You always need a population, so it was actually quite simple. So what we did also, it's a ponderation model, so we linked it to the coding system, and you could decide if you have more rural population or urban population, green areas, centers. And then we also developed a little 3D model based on that. That was already a while ago. And then I did some testing. So this was just some fun work to do. And you already see, I really like this because it's very simple. It comes from GIS, but it's very simple. But you already see this classic fractal constitution in this little 3D model. And you see how in this case, and this comes from many cities, the historic core, this is a little historic town in Austria, is actually highly accessible, a lot of function, good evaluation, people want to live there, high rental prices. This was how the first software in Java looked like. Just to give you an idea how we set it, and you could actually use shapefiles to load in. And this, I did this for Chiara. Chiara, where are you? We were talking about space syntax yesterday. And this is actually, I put this slide in for you. This is how it decomposes, also all the iteration step for Vienna Bratislava. But interesting enough, I found a way in space syntax to, how can I say it? To calibrate the measures in such a way that I get a bit of a crystal centrality function. And this would be kind of this classic centrality / spatial accessibility, as space syntax call it. You would do the elevated craft, and I started playing around and found a calibration, how you can depict for a region a crystal hierarchy with space syntax. And this was then decisive for where to start with the model, how to start with the model, and kind of get an overview about where are potential risks, where you want to increase centrality, what is important, so, this classical whole crystal thing, and on in terms of to enhance also a spatial hierarchy, and not only in South Germany, where it seems working well or not anymore nowadays around. This was then the syntactic evaluation, very classic, just to give you an idea how it looked. And also here in this syntactic evaluation, I combined in there also a space syntax, so it means you can enrich the model in many ways with your classic accessibility analysis and centrality analysis and many more. And then actually is Fractalopolis 2.0, this was the calibration period. I think it became really interesting because what we did is we included a formal concept of people satisfaction. So it's not only enough that you have access to a function, but do people really go there if I have my bakery there? You know, maybe I buy everything in the supermarket on a weekly basis and I don't need my fresh bread weekly because I put it in the oven or do it myself or whatever. So there was, which meant actually that we updated the accessibility equations. And it's now also dependent of the residents who are living there and who are using different kinds of amenities according to a temporal scale. Where did this come from? This was an interesting PhD thesis, also done in Besançon, where actually, and this is again context depending, so theoretically you might have similarities between different countries, but you have to kind of redo or evaluate and review this. 100 French master plans were evaluated in this PhD thesis to understand actually what people want, to understand the hierarchy of needs, so the frequency of attendance, that's our temporal scale, the satisfier, so of course you need a hospital, you need medical support, you need a dentist, so also how important is it? That was then the need, which you see in the next column. Then, of course, the empirical data about acceptance of distances. So we had this discussion today. Maybe some are willing to walk 1 kilometer, some are willing to walk 2 kilometers, or maybe with your bicycle, difference between 3 to 10 kilometers. So, for example, Dutch people would have a max catchment area / radius with the bicycle of 10 kilometers. In other countries, maybe just 2 or 3 kilometers, where I say, well, you would use the bicycle to your next amenity, your next shop, to your job, etc. So from this acceptance of distances, we also were looking at the empirical data here. So how the diversity, so we also had in the previous model, and we took this over about this acceptance, is we had a diversity model of function, and we had a competitive model of function. So we had in one cell within 800 meters, if you're one flower shop and one hairdresser, you're coherent, so your diversity is satisfied. If you have 2 flower shops, then it's competition. And of course, the quality of the flower shop is not there, why people would go to one flower shop or the other. So we started trying to look into this a little bit by also this, where do residents actually go? What do they use? And then looks fancy, but it's actually the same thing we saw before, just with the difference of the satisfaction number. So where do residents go and the number of considered amenities, and then again up, the aggregation and the frequency of attendance. What was implemented newly in there, because before we just had accessibility on the network and a little bit of proximity to public transport, now we had a real temporal level of accessibility to public transport. And again, what I'm showing here, and this is most important also for the other means of accessibility, we implanted everywhere a fuzzy logic. Obvious. I'm very happy to walk 1 kilometer, 1.5, I accept, I will still walk 2 kilometers, I'm not going to walk anymore. And we implement this for everything, actually. That's why I'm showing this one, and you see it here. So every function I came up with for the beta version, the first version, the operationalization, had the fuzzy logic implemented according to temporal distances and catchment areas. And I'm soon finished. This was then actually QGIS. Pierre provided me, thankfully, with this slide. So the idea was then really how to deal if we have this application in QGIS and develop this one. And I want to highlight a classic problem we all have and are facing here. So you load your shape data, you start, developing your scenarios, you into iteration, etc., etc. And oops, sorry, that's a spoiler. And what I'm also saying is here, several hours for the dwellings, because what we did not the population model by cell or raster, which is the classic GIS approach. We did then transfer the population model by dwelling. So originally we just did it statistically in the beta version, the first version, and now it's really calculating accessibility from every dwelling in your cell to every temporal scale you are putting into the system and you want to know of. So several hours. If I have the mayor sitting here, you just can't do this, right? So it's a classic pre-preparation of scenarios and data. If you have done this and then you want to do your scenarios, so you're moving around your little cells in there to your morphological cells to see how it's working. And then for the satisfaction zones or potential development zones, then it's less than 1 hour. To be very honest, it's still way too much if you want to have an interactive model and software and you have decision makers and stakeholders around. But this is what we're dealing with at the model, and hopefully we find better solutions, but we have to be honest, we all know that nothing is perfect. And last but not least, I also would like to highlight, and we have your colleagues from Cagliari as well, that Chiara Garau is currently also in France with Pierre Frankhaus, and this is the latest, some of you have seen this already, ongoing model on Cagliari and the metropolitan region. And now we're moving back and even closer to Kristalla, because starting with the very theoretical Sierpinski, we now implemented the Kristalla hexagons, which of course catchment area circles is a better fit, is also a better fit when you're playing around for the iteration steps. And these are the first results. I hope we see way more results in the next 3 weeks when Chiara is back. And then here you also see the first accessibility and population evaluation and also the surface of QGIS. So that's actually how it's gonna look in there. Quite familiar, nothing super exciting. Oh yes, and this was something I really wanted to do. Most important, a good user interface. So you have a lot of sliders to play around here, where you can change parameters without knowing anything about ponderation rules or other things. And so to simplify the usage and make it extremely user-friendly, there was long discussions how to do that. So that was important for us. A bit of it's not gamification, but serious games in a way. And yes, thank you so much. And I hope I could deliver a bit of some interesting thoughts for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara, for your interesting and very clear presentation. Questions?
There's one.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, it works. Thank you, Claudia, for your very interesting presentation. And I have two ideas in the sense that two questions.
Yes.
Just simplifying. Sorry if I'm wrong with that. It seems that forms follow function, and in some sense, it's a long debate in architecture if function follow forms or the other way around. What I want to know is from a theoretical point of view, how does these fractal cities form themselves, in the sense that it is a sort of top-down, invisible hand of optimization due to economic and other rationale of optimization aspects that force the city to grow like a tree or brain network, or otherwise is a sort of extrusion process for which only the function located according to those fractal patterns survive in time. So this is my first question. The second question.
So I'll first answer the first one,
Okay.
because it's sorry, but it's
the second strictly follow the first.
Yes. Okay.
So please.
Yes,
Thank you.
I just answer. Thank you so much. It's a very important question, which I did not have time to elaborate on. This model actually works bottom up, top down. So you first decompose and then you start composing. And if you see on a, let's say, a regional scale or intermediate, kind of an urban scale or metropolitan scale, the evaluation is not good. You can add a function, you can add a service, and then analytically you will see them locally on your housing plot, for example. So that was very important for me, because what you're saying, and this is super important, and this is an ongoing debate, optimization of cities is a bottom-up and a top-down process. It's both at the same time. You never have a pure bottom-up process, and for some new towns, you have a pure top-down process. But considering kind of the classic, let's say, European city, I'm not even talking about postmodern American cities, we have these classic mixtures of bottom-up and top-down. So, Bauhaus, you were talking about this Bauhaus approach a little bit, form follow function, function follows form. So in this software, we implemented kind of both. So the idea was to have kind of a mutual feedback loop in there, which the time didn't allow to elaborate how that works. And I would be happy to show this when the software is finished, how that really live works in QGIS. But thank you so much. Super important and very valuable question.
And thank you, Claudia. That's complexity in some sense. That
It is
works
complexity.
that way. So it's perfect to have a software and a tool which can balance these two aspects, which from my point of view is a little bit wild. I mean, it's an open debate. But from another point of view, from a theoretical point of view, my question is, how all this accord to the free will of an architect, which design, or it thinks to design something, to plan the city, or otherwise you think that this theory may mirror a sort of embedded human way of thinking, and of course design, and of course express also, produce gods from the small thing, design things to the city?
So first of all, I started off as an architect, and I was even working in architecture practice, so I know how it works. First of all, this is now a very provocative question, but why should architects have a free will and we're not looking at the needs of people? First of all, you know, the idea of we have seen it in postmodern approaches, the idea of the godlike hand, you know. We all know this very, very famous image, the city as a machine. Even Bill Hillier uses this as one of his first books, this machine paradigm. And then we say, okay, but it's a social spatial analysis. First of all, okay, but I completely understand what you mean. So, sorry, and then you wanted to know the godlike hand. Sorry, can you repeat the second part of your question?
No, the second part was related to if this accord to a free will, okay, but also if you think that our brain, how we evolve as human, in some sense accord to all this. This is a sort of fil rouge beneath them.
Yes. Okay, there have been a very interesting, especially if you like Environmental and Planning B, one of our house chores, I would say, in this community. There have been very interesting research about from the US already many years actually ago, how we decompose neurological the built environment, and the way we see the built environment and we analyze it internally is a fractal system. Our brain works according to a fractal system. the way we perceive the built environment. And there were studies with students, and it was really, really interesting about visual perception and the way we decompose the built environment, and it's called visual harmony. And they used, so students could evaluate photos. Street design, built environment design, all kind of photos. And then those photos ran through a so-called box counting analysis in order to understand the fractal dimension. And of course, before you do that, you have to code the elements in this picture. You have to see a tree is this, and then I have 70% of a tree in there, and maybe 5% of a facade, or, you know, you have to code these pictures, obviously. And it came out that those images, these photographs, and it was tested by over 250 students. They had several publications on that, really interesting ongoing research. It was tested that the most visual harmonious images had the most ideal fractal dimension. So the best composition, and this was of course on a local scale, but the best composition according to a fractal logic. And then, of course, we know the work of Marshall, of Betty. They have been fantastic introduction to richness of complexity. So, of course, I also worked a lot in complexity theories and published book on test complexity for planners. Read my handbook if you're interested in that. So it's really, it goes naturally with the way we perceive the built environment and decode it also. So I think it's a perfect response. And yes, it's a theoretical model. Yes, it's a conceptual model. Yes, it's a first step in a very big field. I completely agree.
Thank you so much.
Laura.
Hi, thank you very much for presentation. I have just one curiosity about scenario development, because you were mentioning different scenarios. You were developing different scenarios. How do you develop them? Because those variables you were mentioning, which relate about morphology, functions, accessibility, population, they are all interrelated. So
they are all interrelated.
If you change one, I mean, all the others will be changed.
That's why they are weighted.
Also in iterative ways, you know?
Yes.
So how do you develop this? Because
you just move the cell around. So with your spatial expertise, you can just say, oh, this is an area I would be interested, or maybe there's a strategy from the municipality or a national strategy or a regional one. And then you can just manually move the cells around in the system. So you, as a planner, decide what you're interested in. It's not an automated process.
You move, I mean, which variable do you consider the one?
No, you move the morphological, you move the cell, and then you run the analysis, and then when you say, oh, I don't know, this accessibility, according to my experience, there's something going on, we don't need so much weight into the bakery next door, then you change the weighting. Because then you can change the weighting and say the bakery is not so important. So in this synthetic evaluation, the accessibility to the bakery around the corner will be diminished. So you can...
Okay, so basically the action the policymaker is taking is only about the morphology.
No, you can also change the accessibility rules weightings, yes. And also, if I show with the slider, you can also say, what is the influx of people and how many people are willing to move to the rural areas? So you can change all the parameters yourself. But of course, you have classic accessibility rules in there.
Yeah, because it's not so linear, I think, because all those variables are linked in more complex ways. So
they are.
It's difficult to.
So if you
change,
if you say, for example, but it's through the coding system. So the coding system was the trick for the iteration to link those. But of course, you have to reprocess. You change something, you reprocess.
Thank you, Claudia. It's absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I was wondering whether you might have some ideas around how approach like this could address some of the issues that we have in South Africa, for instance, where A lot of our cities have evolved from a very poor legacy of apartheid planning after during segregation, racial segregation. There was very little logic under which no logic really dictated how, especially the informal settlements, developed, and it's still the situation. The only logic is survival. And I was just wondering whether you see that this approach could help address some of those challenges.
I could observe a very interesting study from one of my more junior colleagues a while ago when I was in London on shanty towns in South Africa. And what I've shown you with the space syntax approach, I would definitely combine it on a local scale with a space syntax approach, because she was very successful in applying this and starting creating a discussion about slum upgrade and upgrading, more deprived areas and what it means. So it's more about integration, segregation, centrality, equity, walkability. Depends a bit of the climate and the year when you want to walk or not, if it's very hot or very cold. So I would combine it actually.
So you would be able to replace, for instance, the accessibility variables with a different social...
You would not replace them. You would enrich the model, look at the deeper insight, because one is a raster cell-based logic and the other one you can do in street segment. So first you create an overview of what you want to know, and then you look more deeply into the issue and the matter at hand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, nice presentation. My question is about the future of the concept.
The future, excuse me?
I'm sorry, future of the concept.
Yes.
We had Corona, we had many new issues, like, for example, online shopping, online ordering food. You can take online supermarket things. So Zoom cities, online gaming, the rise of online gaming. So the meaning of the space and centrality is very challenging now after this experience. So I have one story, let's say friend of friend who rent a flat which is near to center of distribution of online shopping and online food delivering.
Yeah.
And it was backward place in the city. Now it's, for him, it is the central place because he live online. So practically my question is how it will, I don't know, challenge the concept of shrinking of fractal cities regarding this different meaning of the space and centrality within this online Zoom ICT-driven urban development.
I completely agree. We had a long discussion, in French you call it télétravail. We had a long discussion if we should include teleworking, teleshopping and so on, because it's a spatial shortcut, obviously, shrink to zero in terms of accessibility. Well, no, logistic centers. You could implement logistic centers because you also need a distribution from logistic centers, for example, even when you do online shopping. So you do have a spatial component, but I completely agree. But we decided not to consider it in this model for now. And what I observe, like post-pandemic behavior, and I'm honestly, like all of us, we all do online shopping, more or less. But we are social beings, and I think what I also see in dell'Aquila yesterday evening, people are going back on the street, people are going back to shops, people want to have, see other people again. So I think we will find an equilibrium in when we do online shopping and when we go spatially shopping and go into the street and talk to other people. And of course, you could implement in the model the location of logistic centers, because we will also need logistic centers for distribution, for example. And then you could calculate the accessibility and the distribution of logistic center between the different dwellings. And maybe also the land use changes. Maybe we want more cafes and less shops, to come together.
Other questions?
Thank you very much for your inspiring talk.
Thank you.
I was wondering if, well, I found some linkages with the concept and the theories of resilience.
Yes.
Like, of course, like hierarchy, modularity, and so on. But on the other hand, I was thinking, okay, maybe the idea of optimization is not so close to the idea of redundancy, no, from the resilience theory. So I was wondering if there's any, linkages between the two theories and if this was ever explored.
I mean, thank you so much. Thank you very much for a really good question. Of course, indirectly, the idea of resilience is in there, but resilience is also very much about, and this links it to complexity theory and also these ecosystems, which we all know, these famous publications. It's more about the recovery of a system. You're resilient if you can recover fast. The system is resilient if you lose a node and you're still working. And it's quite interesting, before we operationalized that, I was looking at that. I was looking at all these network theories and what it means in terms of resilience. But we all do know it's not directly considered, but indirectly we all do know walkable systems, and especially we suggested this to colleagues and projects in Japan, is when you have a walkable city, you also can determine exit routes. And when you, for example, have natural hazards like tsunamis or earthquakes, those exit routes are highly, highly, highly important. So you, with these accessible measures, and I'm not talking to function, but the green areas, safe areas, certain functions which they use, for example, in Japan, they are elevated houses for flooding when you have tsunamis. A lot of people also do not know that Norway has the highest amount of local tsunamis in the world, fjord tsunamis are they called. So you can add function with the accessibility and get the idea of distribution for this exit emergency housing like they do in Japan, or exit routes. And we've also did a very interesting, it's one of my books in there, research on tsunami, how the street network and accessibility plays a crucial role for mortal rates. Because in an emergency system, we don't think, we just follow what we see. So this is how you could partially, or you could start using the model in that sense. What is the accessibility? How's the exit route, and combine it with other means for these emergency houses like the Japanese do? And we had some very vital discussions with some Japanese colleagues on that, because they do it on a city scale, and they have to do it on a city scale aside from their tsunami walls. Yeah.
Other question?
Thank you for your presentation, and I apologize if you already mentioned what I want to ask and I didn't get that, but I was wondering, is there any aspect related to soil morphology included into the model?
What do you mean by soil?
The morphological aspects of the territory.
Yes. What we did, and it's very simple, I'm very honest here, we did restricted areas. So you just use a shapefile where you put in restricted areas for certain reasons. Either it could be a slope where you cannot build anymore, or it could be because of some natural protection areas, etc. So there's a layer in the model of restricted areas where the model recognizes it, and you cannot move your cell over this protected area layer. So it's very simple, and it means manual preparations, but that's actually how we solved it.
Okay, so do you believe that slope is something that somehow...
You can use it for various reasons. Okay. Wherever you think you cannot build up or use the green space there, it's up to the local context or the regional context. It can be various things.
Okay.
It's just a restricted area then in the calculation, and it's not considered.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again. It was very nice. I have a question that goes a bit beyond, let's say, the model, because even to me at least, I think it's very hard to really get Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
thank
sorry.
you.
To get exactly what you did in terms of, computational and whatever you did. So I was wondering whether you already managed, and if it's in your interest or maybe not, to show the results to like policy or decision makers or planners, like traditional planners.
Yeah, actually we showed it to IBM. So I remember the first time, it was 2010. So we showed the first results to IBM. You know, remember they had the Smart City initiative back then coming from Dublin. So that was the first guys we showed it to, and it was a bit interesting. It was a bit too much for them, I have to be very honest. So they were thinking, what are these crazy academics doing here? We want to make some money. We still kept on doing, and then of course we involved some decision makers in business law in France because it's easier, and it's also a bit of what is the research tradition, what are those people with political will and power, as we used to say, are willing to do. But actually I also suggested, and I think this is mainly important, that we just run several tests with different stakeholders, and we monitor those processes, how they respond. So once this QGIS application is finished, which I think is vital for that, not that you have your better version and in Java, which was very technical, I have to say, we want to run some tests in the future with different stakeholders.
The images that you showed us, the maps and stuff, are the final output of this plugin, or it's like something, let's say, a bit more readable for a decision maker?
It's the final output.
That's the final output.
Yeah, but it's a color code. You just color code it like classic GIS analysis. You just have a color code, and you decide on the color code. Green is good, red is bad, the other way around. So it's very classic. It's a matter of visualization, mostly for decision makers.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask you something more?
Sure.
Because I was thinking.
Now you make me sweat.
I just wondering if. Yes, I will for sure. I will for sure. But then I need to ask something. I hope it could be interesting. I need to know if in the model you define, but before define, detect some emergency threshold, in the sense making the thinking about a tree, a certain number of cells, make a leaf, a certain number of leaf, make a branch, a certain number of branch, make a tree and the forest. But there are some thresholds which are qualitative, new. And this organic grew, you can set up some threshold, you identify what kind of threshold.
You do, yes, you do. You do it with.
But you do by the user do, or you already embed some kind of threshold?
No,
I mean,
the user does it via the iteration function system when you decide on the iteration and the initial figure. And I've run several tests with several different fractal approaches. I quickly mention it. Sierpinski, Fournier, we used circles, we used all kind of mathematical approaches to geometrical, the form of how you would do it. Now it's the hexagon, which is very suitable because it combines the edges with a circle in a way. And you, as the user, decide based on your knowledge via the iteration function system, how many cells, what you're talking about, through the iteration will be reproduced. So, and then you can say, I want to have, I don't know, you have 4 subcenters. So you can then also say, and it's via the reduction. It's a fractal logic. It's via the reduction factor. You decide on how many cells per iteration step are produced. So you as a user can decide, and you can play around with it.
This is a linear scale or a sublinear? There is some.
It's a multifractal non-linear scale because this is your original iteration step, and then you just decide on the density of the cell. How many cells? And do you want to have 8 subcenters or only 3 because it's a very dispersed areas, for example, or maybe it doesn't fit to the pattern you're observing in that area. So we're coming back to the architect in a way.
Okay, thank you. I think we will continue our discussion later.
Claudia, thank you very much. Just
Thank you.
Is just a comment, and especially is the curiosity to understand your position about the question that I asked to myself, first of all.
Yes.
I have to be honest, I'm really fascinating on how very complex model could drive a new knowledge, understanding, perception of the complexity of the city during the process of decision making about how to plan, how to design the future of a specific place, of a specific communities. But of course, complex models needs competencies, data availability, computational capacity, no? So there is a huge amount, an effort, to be provided in order to gain the advantages, of the complex model. Yes. So I am fascinated on it because it becomes from, it is in my background, it is in my application and so on. On the contrary, face of the medal, I'm also fascinating on a sentence, on something that I learned from Karl Steinitz a few years ago. He stated that I'm very interested in not in a complex solution for simple problems, but on simple solution for very complex problems.
Yeah.
It is exactly the contrary affirmation. I have not my position. I have the question. What is your points about?
Okay, first of all, how can I compete with Carl? It's not possible. No, yeah, I completely understand. And actually, yes, you could, yes. So, first of all, it has nothing to do with perception of complexity on a local scale, what you're talking about, right? Yes. No, it's a planning model. So richness of complexity, and we perceive it as a local scale, is a very different matter and also belongs more into the quality of the built environment. Of course, which has spatial indicators, context, etc. As we all know, Nico Salingaros have been working a lot on that, etc., etc. The second of it, it may sound very complicated, but actually what we do is we mimic nature. We mimic the logic of nature. And this is what this model does, is mimicking an optimization process. And the rest is classic accessibility with a fuzzy logic, classic functions through a database, and taking into consideration people's choices and needs. To break it down in a simple manner. It's just the way you combine these models that's new. The models itself, aside from the multifractal carrier, which we use, is not new. But yes, you could say, why not to take the Copenhagen finger plan? Fine, it's a fractal. What if you have no knowledge on how the built or regional environment works in terms of optimization process of complexity? There's a simple thing just to move a cell from left to right. But I completely agree what you mean. I completely agree. We should not create a black box. And there was also huge discussions is, how much do you put into this model in order still to be validated and valuable contribution, and when do you create the black box? But this is kind of an ongoing discussion. How much input do we need in order to how much do we manipulate the output, the input-output paradigm? And this has been an ongoing discussion here as well. And we are very much aware of this. But, yeah, I completely agree with Carl. I completely agree. It's just a new way of thinking. Because it's not even a super dynamic simulation where we don't know what's going on inside the box, the black box.
Other questions? Dario, are you sure that you don't know? That you completed? No?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So can we move this on to a little coffee break for me? That would be very kind. And please cut this out of the recordings.
Okay, for a researcher who works in space syntax, I suggest the book, the previous book by Claudia Yamu, not Van der Lag, with the full name with an Aquivanes on Springer book in open access. You can download if you want. It's wonderful. And I suggest the forthcoming book, forthcoming by Claudia Van der Lag, in this case, with Valerio Cutini. And probably more and more better than the first.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Attending for your presentation and for your question. A very animated session with a lot of questions. Very, very interesting. Thank you again.
Thank you.